Alright, hi everyone. Welcome to next episode. Okay, so in this episode we would um, create helper methods for our CLI UI, right? Okay, so our CLI, which just short for command line interface, is actually this interface, a similar one to this. It could be different across OS. It could be your Bash or ZSH shell on Linux and Mac. It could also be your command line interface or your PowerShell or terminal on Windows. Okay, so but however, these are interface. So this isn't your standard GUI interface where you have buttons to click, text boxes. Okay, I wish we could have that in PHP. They're actually tools that allow you to build desktop applications with PHP, but we won't be using that. So we'll just be using command line interface. Now PHP gives us some tools for us to both write to the command line interface and also to read from the command line interface. Okay, uh, so we'll be creating some helpers to help us with common tasks like printing to the console and um, also to read from the console, right? Okay, so let's do that. Doing right. So what we're going to do, I think we might want to remove all this. So we'll create, just like we have our database helper here, we'll create another helper called CLI helper. So let's do that. So let's say class CLI helper, or we could call it UI helper or something. Right, let's call it that. Now I'm going to just have static functions, right? We don't want to have to create instances of it. So let's see, static functions. So first we'll create a print line, or we'll call it print ln, okay, which accepts a value and prints it. So this would accept a string or anything that can be, would I say, converted into a string. Alright, so let's test this. Let's see, value, right? And the reason we're doing this is so that we don't have to do echo, then we'll have to attach this PHP URL. As you can see, we have different places where we want to print and insert a new line, but we don't want to have to repeat it every time. We could forget. Okay, so we want to create it once and replace our calls with that. Okay, so let's do that. I think I'll be taking this up. Yeah, right. So we basically just want to do echo value followed by PHP URL. That's basically all we're going to be doing for this. So let's test that. Let's see. Let's say we have a value. Well, yeah, we could just call it here. Let's comment this out. Let's say CLI helper print ln, or we could call it let's see. Should we call it print line like this? It's usually the standard, or should we call it output, right? Yeah, let's call it write line. I think I'll prefer that. So let's say write line. So let's change the name of our function to write line. Okay, so for write line we'll just do hello, welcome to our banking CLI App. Right, let's see what happens when we do this. So let's execute PHP main.php. Right, so you can see we have a new line. But what if we pass an object? Okay, so let's create an object. Let's see, how do we get an object? Oh yeah, we could retrieve an object by, I'm not sure what the ID for this is, so maybe we could check that. Does it work for? But we won't be printing objects usually. Okay, I just want to see if it works with objects that implements to string. Okay, so maybe we can try something. Let's say demo class, for example. Just give it a simple private property, which is going to be a string. Let's say name, and let's say we have a constructor, public function construct. Let's say this must accept the string, we'll call it name, and then would assign that to this value. So say name equals to name, and then we would implement to string. Now let's see what happens when we don't implement to string. Right, so let's create an instance of this. Let's see, demo equals to new demo class. Let's say PHP. Let's see, helper outline demo. Alright, okay, so we have, so right now it doesn't print this because it's expecting a string, which okay is correct. But let's see what happens when we implement to string. Let's do return name, then we would echo this, so this name. Let's see what happens when we do this. Oh yeah, it works as long as we implement to string, so it works. Alright, nice. Okay, so let's do for read line. Right, so we have write line, we have read line. R comes before W, so let's do that above. So we'll say function, it doesn't matter anyway, but I like to make it feels really to read before, right? So okay, so let's do read line, and read line is going to have some special stuff. So first, we want read line to be flexible. We want to be able to accept null values, okay, and we want to be able to add some validation to the data that we receive, right? So first we need the first parameter, which will be the so read line's job is to read a value from the console. So we could just say return read line, okay, which just calls the PHP's read line function. But read line has a label, so we can specify a label that would appear when you want to read the value, so that we know what we want to read. Okay, if we just do it like this, then it won't really be much help. So let's try that. So let's say name equals CLI helper read line, right? So if we do this, it just gives us this blank prompt. So we need to be able to know, like, what are you expecting us to read here? Okay, so we like to pass a label, which is usually the case if you are using the PHP readline function. So the first thing we'll accept is a label, which we are going to make compulsory, and we'll do this. So say label would be label followed by this, and then we might want to trim this if the user includes it, but this is our app, we'll make sure that we just pass the label without having this column. We'll expect the readline function here to take care of it. Okay, so let's see how it is now. What do we have? Okay, yeah, we didn't pass a label, so let's do that. So let's see name. Right, so if we run it this time, it shows us the name. So now it makes sense that, okay, yeah, we need your name here. So if you do Andromatus, yeah, now this is fine. So that's that. Now we also want to know, sometimes the user might pass a blank value. Okay, so let's see, let's do a var dump. If we run this and we put a name, says Andromatus, it shows us what it received there. But what if we don't put anything? Okay, it returns a blank string. And what if we don't want a blank string? What if we want to do a kind of validation to whether we want to accept a blank string or not? Okay, we want to enforce that, okay, this field is required, you must put a value, and if you don't put a value, then we would keep requesting you to put a value. Okay, right, so let's do that. Now we're going to make it optional because you might want a blank string, maybe you want a field to be optional. Okay, so we can have something like bool allow let's see, allow blank string, or we can do is required. Okay, it's required, which can be false by default. So the idea behind this is, if it's required, you must provide a value, okay, for that. So how do we enforce this? Okay, so we could check first, we could get the value. So we'll see input equals to whatever we got from readline, then we'll check if is required. Okay, so if is required is true, so if it's true, and trim input. Okay, so I want to remove any blank space. Okay, I want to see if this is empty. We could trim it here to make sure we don't receive blank. Okay, so let's do the trim. Okay, and so we'll say, and input is empty. What do we want to do? So we don't want the user to want to keep the user here. Okay, so the user will keep typing till the user meets this condition. Okay, but we can't do it here, because if we do it here, we need to accept the input again. So what we can do is we could have a while loop and say while true. So we'll add this here in the while loop. Then we can have a condition to break out of the while loop. Okay, so first we receive the input, trim it, and then we check if is required and it's empty. So if it's required and it's not empty, okay, then we can break out of the loop. Okay, else we echo, since we have our right line, we can use it here. So right line, then we can see let's see what do we use as the error message? Okay, so we can see label is required. Please try again. Right, and this keeps repeating till you provide this value. So let's try that. So if is required, so what if it's not required? What happens? So if it's not required, it won't break here. Okay, so we need this to only be enforced if only if this is required. Okay, only if it's required is false. So let's do, so if is required is false. If it's not required, so if it's not required, then we can break, right? But if it is required, then we should check if it's not empty. And if it's not empty, then we break. So we need to say or, right? So if it's required, so if it's required is not true. Yes, so if it's not required, which is true, then we break. But if this is false, which means if required is true, then we check this. Yeah. So let's see that in action. So we leave it at the default. Okay, so what do we have here? We started something that we didn't end. Sorry, which line is it? 7. Okay, yes. Right? So because if you notice, we didn't pass that parameter because it's optional and by default it's false. So it's not required, it's false by default. So let's just pass blank. So you can see it returns that. But we should return something instead of null. We don't want to return a blank string. So I like this. It returns either null or a value. Okay. So let's type this to return string. And yeah, so we're trimming this. Okay, so input, so it's not required now, and we put optional. Yeah, we aren't returning anything from here, that's true. So let's return whatever value we have here instead of breaking. So do return input, right? So which means this could be a blank string or an actual string. However, we want to know if the string is empty, and we want a string if there is an actual value. Okay, so I want to create how do I put it? What's the word it's called? Is it consistency? Well, that's not the word I'm looking for. I want to create an API that is predictable. Yeah. So we would do an extra check to see if this is blank. Okay. So if this is empty, what do we return null? So let's do if input has something. Okay, we return input, else return null. So let's try that. Okay, now we have null. So let's pass a value. Okay, now we have a value. So now let's make it required. Let's say this field is required. So let's do true. Okay. So if I put blank, it tells me name is required. Please try again. So I'll have to keep providing this till, or I'll be facing this error till I provide a value. Okay, so let's say I do let's say I do blank space. So it trims it, it doesn't allow it. But let's say I put in a name, let's say meow, and it receives that. So this is what we want. Now we might want to create a way to hint that this field is required. Okay, so maybe we could do like a label required or something as part of the label. Okay, so let's say let's see. What do we do? Do we do something like required here? Or do we just put star? Let's see. Required. I want to see how it looks. Required. Okay, nice. I think this is fine. So we can have, let's say, label display. Label would be so if is required, then this would be label, then we'll have required followed by this, else we just return label. So if you notice, this is actually what is dynamic here. It's just this, the rest is the same. So we would take display label and we'll show that here instead. So we can just pass display label. Alright, so alright, so let's see how it works now. Okay, so now it's required. So what if we do not include it? Let's see what we get. Let's say we make this false. Okay, just shows us the name. Beautiful. And what if we don't include it? Right, nice. Okay, so let's see. We might need other CLI helpers. I was thinking creating something like a form builder that allows us to build a form. I'm not my head isn't settled on the planning, but let's see how it goes. But we'll stop here. Alright, so in the next episode, we might create the form builder for our CLI, or we will go straight to preparing our menu manager. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next one.